Hey, I'm going to talk today about kind of what we're doing in our poultry group, and really my perspective is to talk about the success, not of our company in the industry, but really about how we've used technology to really move forward and address some, I'll say, issues that are key to our industry. I like this title better, really about how do you come up with a genetics program when the world is changing on us incredibly rapidly, and to focus our efforts today on what's the genomics part of that story for us. But really, sustainability is driven by innovation. If you keep doing things the same way, and our CEO for Tyson Foods would say, what got us here ain't what's going to get us there. And that's really the mentality that I really want to talk about. Key messages today: more data is better. I spent a lot of money to prove this, and you have to trust me that more data is better. Now, whether it's worth the investment to get the data or not, it's a different question. How do you capture value from those investments? DNA genotypes, it's just data. There's nothing special about DNA. DNA is just another piece of data that you can use. More data is better, i.e., DNA information is better as well. This came up today. Phenotypes are king. Don't ever forget that DNA is cheap, easy, fast, very robust data set. The value's in the phenotypes. If you can't measure performance, if you can't measure the trait you're interested in, if you can't understand what the customer wants, you can do all the DNA work you want, you're not going to get anywhere. And genomic selection works. Hard to prove that genomic selection works, especially in an industry like the beef industry. It's incredibly fragmented. For me, this is a huge challenge for my group because we spent a lot of money in genomic selection, and to show that investment was worth it, we had to show it works. That's the story I'm going to tell you today. It does work, and it works in lots of different industries and lots of different opportunities, even if it's really hard to show that it works. So if we talk about feeding the world and look at what's happened, 1961, about 6 billion chickens were slaughtered in the world. Today, there's about 60 billion chickens that are slaughtered to meet the food demand. If we hadn't delivered with genetics improvements in what happens when we raise chickens, it'd be a really different story. So this is really here today, what happened this is a bird that's the same age. This bird goes about 5.5 pounds. This bird barely went 2 pounds. Here's a cross section, and here's the difference in amount of feed that it takes to grow that bird to a market age. And so genetics has delivered huge improvements in our ability to use chicken as a product. If we hadn't done that, we'd be killing about 25 billion more chickens today than we do to meet that same amount of protein demand that's out there for chicken. The answer is, if we keep innovating, we're going to need about 32 billion chickens less in 2050 than if we stop and just use today's bird. So when we go out and talk the message about feeding the world and the value of improvements in genetics, this is a story we try to tell. It's not about growing a different chicken. It's about reducing the impact out there in the world on what it takes to feed that world. Strategy we have: every year a bird is genetically superior to the year before. And in fact, every 7 weeks my bird is genetically superior, the way we run our breeding program. But we really focus on what does the market need and what are the expectations of the market. We spend a lot of time listening to our customers in the market. And then how do you leverage innovation? Again, if you're not innovating, you're stuck with what you know today, and that's probably not going to solve the problems you still have going forward. So we spend a lot of time investing in new technologies. We're looking for ways to put new paradigms in our breeding program. We're trying to figure out how to select for new traits that we've never been asked to select for before. Big one for us right now is antibiotic-free production. We've never had to have a chicken go out there and perform in an antibiotic-free environment. We've not had chickens had to go out there and perform in high heat environments. Water's probably going to become limiting. Lots of things out there that are changing for us, or old traits in a new environment, i.e. the absence of antibiotics. And then how do we improve the genetic products into current products, but how do we accelerate development of new products? Genetics has a long time frame, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to develop a new genetic product out there. We probably don't have that luxury anymore to do that, and we've got to figure out how to do this faster. I'm going to talk about people and technologies today. And people and technologies are really the only option you have to go out there and do something different that you can take to the marketplace. We spend about $3 million on a database system. This fully integrates data collection at our farms, back to our corporate offices, and essentially makes that seamless. And what we try to do is reduce the errors associated with capturing phenotypic information. Those phenotypes are so valuable, and the amount of money we spend raising birds and having people on farms collecting this data is so valuable that we needed a system better than we had before. All my geneticists, no matter which farm they're at, can access all the data we have in the company. 5 years ago, geneticists only saw the road data, and they ran as independent groups. I had problems as simple as aligning product performance coming off of different pedigree farms because they weren't talking to each other, and we couldn't have that transparency around data. And then genomics. Today we spend over $10 million a year, and that over is over. We're not going to put a ceiling on it, but we finally believe that it's worth the investment, and we're spending lots of money. And if we didn't have the data to support this, we would not be spending that money. We'd spend it somewhere else. So I'll give a little background. How does it work in chickens? Same thing works in beef. And we know the information about all the pedigree of that bird as well as all its future pedigree that we're going to get. We capture about 40 or 50 data points, phenotypes for that bird throughout its lifetime on our pedigree farm. And we do a balanced selection program, taking all that data into account. Out of those 40 or 50, we probably use about 25 of them. And we select birds based on different weights that we give to all those genetic targets that we have out there and goals for performance. And it really is about what drives profitability and what do we think that bird needs to do in the future. And that's really feedback we get from our customers in the industry about where we're going. Today, feed conversion, growth rate, yield, but things like leg health, those are the kind of adjustments we've made to our programs to really emphasize things that are important. Heart and lung function. If you don't have strong lungs, if you don't have a heart that's moving oxygen around, you're not going to see that feed conversion and growth rate. And so we directly measure those traits on our birds as well. Some of it's incredibly high tech and some of it's low tech. Selection pressure drives genetic progress. We handle about 2 million pedigree chicks per year. I talked to a chicken group, they slaughter 2 million birds a week. 2 million is not a big number to them. We handle them one at a time. And so we put a wing band on 2 million chicks, and we collect data on 2 million chicks. And so we've got a whole farm staff that I call my doctors and nurses out there taking care of our babies, just like you would your own, and watch those birds throughout their whole lifetime. When we get done to those million males, we only keep 3,000 of those as breeders. We keep about 10% more females, so you know that we made about 1 to 10 in our programs, but the same thing, incredibly high selection pressure. And so we're really looking for that gold medal athlete, that really unique individual that can move genetically in lots of these traits all at once, and they're hard to find. What happens when you do this? Here's genetic progress regarding weight, 42 days of age, pick 1990, about 1,700 grams. Today, that bird's over 2,800 grams. If I would have told the industry that, hey, in 1990, in 2015, this bird's going to be more than twice as big, about twice as big, people probably wouldn't have believed you. So when I get the question of when does this stop, don't know the answer. But I know that every year we have a goal, and every year we select birds exactly to perform at that goal. We have yet to see that genetic potential stop within our program. Here's feed conversion. 1990 took about 2.2 pounds of feed per pound. Today we're down here somewhere in the 1.6, 1.5 range. It's about 2 points of feed conversion per year. When's that going to end? Don't know the answer. Can't go forever, but at some point we'll start seeing that plateau out. But again, we predict and we deliver against this curve that we set on an annual basis as part of our breeding value goals. Here's breast meat. 1990, about 17% breast meat. Today, somewhere around 26, 27% breast meat. Industry asked for it, consumer asked for it, McDonald's asked for it, Chicken McNuggets. And you can see there's two curves here. There's a curve here, and then we've increased that rate of genetic progress because we wanted to, and we had the technology to do that we didn't have before. And so you can change the product pretty quickly if you have the technology and the goal and desire to do that.
So we have a lot of responsibility out there, really about facilitating food security. We've got 50% world market share. We want to make sure our product's environmentally friendly. We know the impact agriculture has. We know the importance that we have in driving towards that. It needs to be economically viable not only for us, but for our customers. And now the consumer is wanting a lot of input in how our food's produced. And so the consumers out there really demanding what's acceptable to them and acceptable to me as a genetics company. Good news out there, poultry is expanding, but antibiotic use is being restricted. Not only the government, but now the companies are coming in and saying, we've heard you, we've heard the consumer, we're responding. People talking about taxing for the environment, what's the impact? The game has changed for us as producers in that about 50% of our cost of live production, 1999, was feed. Today it's over 70%. We're not going to go backwards. And in fact, they're probably going to go the other direction as there's this demand for human grain keeps increasing. What are we going to feed our livestock? We have whole programs addressing on alternative feeds in our program. So, feed costs going forward, alternative ingredients, no antibiotics. We're going to see new diseases. Environmental impact is being quantified, taxed, and the consumer is in the middle of this. And we have different consumers around the world, developed countries, developing countries. All that coming back at the genetics companies that we have to respond to. Our birds are asked to perform in environments that are different around the world, and they get a lot of pressure put on them that the stress they would never see in a selection program. And then I do all my selection of purebreds, and we sell a four-way cross in the marketplace. So those are my huge challenges, and I need to think about these differently than I have in the past. And by thinking differently, I mean outside of the box. I mean, we cannot look at our breeding program like we have in the past, and this is my favorite quote I've ever come across to really talk about that. Electricity in a light bulb, same result as having a candle, but has nothing to do with the technology behind a candle. Fat, fire versus metal, electricity. They both provide light. So we need to think that distinctly when we think about our breeding program. So genomics. We start in 205. What do? We teach our computers what does DNA mean to a bird. And it takes a lot of phenotypes and a lot of DNA to do it, and building up these resource populations that we heard talked about today. And what you want to do is predict a phenotype based on a DNA sequence. Simple phenotype, simple trait, one gene, pretty easy to do. But my computer never has to see these phenotypes. My computer just looks for that G or that A, and it tells me what's going to happen. The reason it can do that is that we did it backwards. We got all the phenotypes, we took the DNA, put them together, let the computer learn. The computer's pretty smart, now we can do it backwards. That's how genomic selection works. Phenotypes are what drive the learning. The DNA sequence is this. There is a data point that lets us assess two different individuals. We collect 60,000 of those from every chick. And even within a pure line, you can see they're not all the same. There's genetic variation in each one of these pure lines. With the high selection pressure we have in our program, if I select males from this blue line, from this population versus this one, in one generation, I can change the biology of that line. I can change the performance of that line, which is a great thing if I'm going in the right direction. If I'm going in the wrong direction, it's a bad thing. But 60,000 data points crammed into something we can see shows us the power of understanding the relationship between a phenotype and using a DNA sequence to predict that. And you'll never hear me talk about the other way. I won't talk about a DNA sequence giving me phenotypes because we don't work that way. We work backwards from phenotypes. So the challenge is not generating data. The challenge is what Corey's group did. They turned it into a business model that drove success. Problem is information isn't knowledge. How do you convert information to knowledge? Information and knowledge is really about people and models that you can test it in. And so the focus is not generating data. The focus is trying to come in here and how to take advantage of that data set that you have. So for the few scientists in the room, I only have 2 data slides to show you that when we look at phenotype predictability and talk about estimating breeding values versus our genomic way of estimating breeding values, we see that for every trait that we measure, we see an improvement in the accuracy. So more data is better. We're more accurate in predicting a breeding value or estimated breeding value for an individual. How well do we predict a bird's own performance? Again, in every case, there's an improvement using genomic data. In fact, the biggest improvement is when we start talking about things that we start thinking about things we don't measure directly or have a different way of measuring it.
regarding own performance. The thing to remember about our program is that I get the own performance data of all the birds on my pedigree farm. So I'm asking genomics to add to something that we're really good at. And by asking genomics to do that, we've really decreased the amount of success chance there is for genomics. And even then I can tell you that it works. And that's not going to be the big win for us. Our big win is going to be about getting genomics to bring traits that we can express in our pedigree farm. But these are all on-farm traits, and it works for every trait we've had. This story has convinced you that even though it might be really hard to measure, every program that's put this in place has shown that genomics delivers some advantage to a breeding program. Whether you can afford it or not is a different question, but for this group, the biggest problem is getting the data set together to be able to do genomic selection. Why does it work? There's a question I have all the time. Why the heck does this work? Seems pretty simple that it should work, but why does it really work? The simplest answer is that if you look at your brother and sister, you share about 50% of your genes. You're 50% related to your mother and you're 50% related to your father. You get half your genes from your two parents. Your brother gets half their genes from those two parents. The question is, did you get the same genes or did you get different genes? BLUP is based on estimating that full sibs share about 50% of their genetic information. Half sibs share about 25%. That's the average. This represents real measurements in our pureline populations of the genetic relationship between full sibs and half sibs. And you can see that these full sibs right here, they share about 65% of their DNA sequence, whereas these full sibs here share less than 40%. So now we know the true relationship between two individuals based on whether they got their grandmother's gene or their grandfather's gene relative to their brother and sister. So it's really about watching chromosome or pieces of chromosomes move through generations. Parentage testing, huge value. On our farms, when I joined, we made no parentage errors. Every pedigree is perfect because we had nowhere to test it. Now we go back and test pedigrees, we find out that there's about a 10 to 15% error. By getting the right parentage put in place, the data set is now accurate, and we can see a huge difference in our understanding of what are the right birds in our program. Parentage is easy to see as the result, but the reality is that's what we do when we estimate relationships between sibs, is we're really getting that true relationship and changing the value we assign to it. Accuracy of the data, more data, the ability to utilize the data translates into better genetic progress and captures value for a program. But today I have to select for new traits. Huge interest in focusing on intestinal health. How do you measure intestinal health? We know there's a relationship with gut health and feed conversion. We know that the nutrition programs are changing. We know that microbial genomics is a big part of it, the selection environments. We know there's lots of disease stuff out there I can't bring on farm. And we know there's lots of suboptimal conditions that are going to stress our birds. I now have the ability to go in there and take a DNA sample of birds in another situation, get my computer to learn about those DNA sequences and ask the question, what are the right DNA sequences on my farm that I should be selecting for traits I can't measure on the farm? Now that we have the proof of concept in place, we're pretty comfortable doing that. So our program has expanded to look at disease challenge models. We look at commercial performance. Every one of my customers challenges 100,000 birds a day. Some birds do well, some do bad. We just go in there and take samples of 1,000 birds at a time, and my computer starts learning about those DNA sequences and the relationship to that environment. And so our program has expanded to bring off-farm data into our pedigree program. That's the only way we can select for new traits. I talked about people. We've gone from 11 to 22 PhDs to be able to handle all this data. And our big investment's been around, I'll say, people that are outside the poultry industry. People who have never seen chickens before a breeding program. That's our strategy. You got to collect the phenotypes. If you're not collecting the phenotypes, you're not going to get anywhere. DNA's cheap, DNA's easy. Not a problem to do. Here are your key messages. More data is better. DNA is nothing but more data. Make sure you're getting good phenotypes, and genomic selection works.